Hey everyone. Want to touch on a topic of organizational theory in the domain of management. My name is Dr. Spence. I have experience, I'm what you refer to as a scholar practitioner. So I have experience both in academic world in terms of on the teaching side, teach for a few different universities, as well as on the practitioner side, meaning that I have the experience that comes from many years of actually working in organizations in various aspects of organizations as a consultant. So I'm a consultant, management consultant. I'm also a professor. I have a doctorate, right? And a postdoc in business and this kind of thing. So I have a lot of experience, and I wanted to just share today some of the thinking around organizational theory, fairly, quick summary of what's involved in organizational theory. I'll make a series of videos after this to kind of follow up, but I'll just start off by talking about the theory itself. So there's kind of two types of organizational structures. And I think when people think of organizational structures or organizational theory, they tend to think of boxes on a graph. Like you have the CEO, on the top maybe, and then you have like, some level of executive management below that, right? And then you have below that, you're gonna have your, your workers, right? So if I were to draw this up here, what you would see is, you have your CEO, maybe this is the seat of the CEO. And maybe underneath that, you're gonna have your C-suite. So maybe you're gonna have your chief financial officer, right? Maybe your chief operating officer, right? Something to that effect. There's others, right? Chief marketing officer, maybe your chief human resource officer, right? And then out of these branches, you're gonna have maybe, your division leaders, right? Further down on these boxes. And this is how the whole organization is structured, and below this, right? And then all the way down to maybe where a worker is actually in the organization doing the work. So that's kind of, I think, when most people think of organizational structures, they think about this, maybe this formal structure. This both is codified in the organization's documentation in terms of how it's going to govern itself, and also where are the decision rights in the organization. So in other words, who has the right to make what decision? A lot of times it's described in a lot of these documentation in the formal structure, right? And I think the other piece of it is what are the roles and responsibilities of the various folks within the organization, right? So what is the role of the chief operating officer? What is that chief operating officer responsible for? What are they accountable for? What are they responsible for? What do they need to consult with the CEO on, or what things that maybe they do not need to consult with the CEO on? What do they need to just maybe inform the CEO of, or not inform, right? So all of these different things may be specified. There may be different thresholds and levels at which this kind of formal structure is set up. Now, of course, there's also the informal structure, which is not codified in any kind of policy documentation, but this may be many times how the organization really makes decisions, but likely it's a combination of both, right? You likely have a combination of both the informal structure. This is just like, water cooler talk, or maybe, social hour after work, or maybe during work, sitting in somebody's office desk side, giving them a desk side brief for maybe half an hour, this kind of thing. This is kind of all part of the informal structure. And a lot of times you would find yourself preparing and doing things like that. And in terms of consulting, that's a lot of what we do in consulting actually is supporting that maybe informal structures in order to help the formal structure make actual decisions, right? So it all kind of works together, but this is kind of the way it shakes out. So managers, they have ways and levers to achieve the organization's vision, right? And part of that being, they have to understand the structure and design, right? They have to also understand the culture and understand how to influence the culture or influence the structure or change the structure and design as needed, right? So, and leverage the culture to help get to that vision. Sometimes the vision changes and the culture has to change to match it, right? And we can have a very long conversation about how that does and does not happen in reality. But in theory, that's kind of what needs to happen. The environment, right? The manager needs to set the environment to make sure that it supports the culture, to support the vision, right? It all kind of works together. And also, of course, resource it, right? Are the right people in the right places? Are the workloads appropriate? And also, is other things like capital and funding and whatever else is needed to make sure that that vision can be carried out. Okay, understanding of the organizational theories and the applications enables managers to efficiently accomplish the task. So as a manager, if you're becoming a manager, it's better, or if you're already a manager, it is good to know some of these theoretical or conceptual models in the background so that you have a better way to kind of think about how the organization is actually ticking, so you can understand how to place yourself within that organization or your team, right? And make sure how you orient your team and things of that nature. So part of this organizational theory, one place we like to start the conversation off is kind of some of the origin around this formalized structure and how it kind of came about, right? And part of that comes out of the thinking of Frederick Taylor, which was basically the father of scientific management. And scientific management is an approach, an art of knowing exactly what you want your men. Obviously, this was written back in this maybe 1700s or something, or not really 1700s, I'm making that up, but many years ago, right? So you could change men to what you want your staff, your people to do, and seeing that they do it in the best and cheapest way, right? So really setting a foundation to actually set people up in a way that they're going to be very effective and efficient and productive in their daily tasks. So that was really the objective. And he's taking a lot, I believe he was a mechanical engineer, but he's taking a lot of those engineering kind of principles and kind of applying them to business. So that's kind of what's going on there. So some of the principles is, let's use science over heuristics, right? So heuristic is like a rule of thumb. So, instead of going off of like a gut feeling or like, oh, we've always done it that way, or I think that person looks the part, right? Let's actually use data and science, right? And scientific thinking to make that decision on who exactly to select for that position. Also, how should we arrange that person's workspace, right? Make sure that everything is appropriately spaced based on human factors and ergonomics and these kind of other elements, right? I mean, he didn't do all of this, but I'm saying he set the foundation for this kind of thinking, right? And it wasn't just him, by the way, there's other folks, but I think Frederick Taylor is maybe one of the most notable folks out there. Harmony over discord, right? So you want to set the conditions so that management and labor is working in harmony, right? And things are on the same frequency, if you will. Cooperation over individualism, right? So maybe an individual has a certain really strong set skill set in one thing. You're going to try to place that person in that function, in that role, but maybe that person may have to tone it down a little bit, right, in order to make the entire system work right, if you will. So we're optimizing for effectiveness, efficiency, but cooperation is really the key, because we want to optimize the entire system, right? So unfortunately, that might mean that somebody who's maybe much more skilled than other folks may have to slow down a bit. But the other side cuts, right, where somebody maybe is less skilled may have to really get their skills up to par to make sure that a system can hum. Develop each person to their greatest efficiency and prosperity, right? So you really want to try to get people into the best role for that person and make sure that they are remunerated in a way that is sufficient, that is appropriate, that is market driven, so that that person is quote unquote happy. And I mean, happy may not be the best word, but that person is sufficiently prosperous in that particular role to keep that system humming, right? So that is the idea there. And then maximum over restricted output. So you want to maximize the output. If you start to constrain the output, right, you're going to kind of disrupt the system. So these are some of the principles that are set forth in scientific management. So, principles are pretty universal. Functions of scientific management. So, you want to look at the skills and abilities to select an employee, right? Also, you want to make sure that the incentives are encouraging them to, work to their best ability. You want to make sure that incentives are aligned properly. There's a lot of times when incentives are just misaligned, and that causes people not to want to work, or maybe they're over incentivized to do maybe something that we don't want them to do. So implement those methods that are based on scientific tasks. Right, carefully observe and eradicate interrupters when the plan runs. So, you want to carefully observe the system and observe the people and make sure everything is humming and working together. And those things that are interrupters or distractors or messing things up, you want to figure a way to get those things either out of the system or revise or refine the system so that those things can be incorporated better. And then, of course, leadership should always set the standard, right? You're going to need the leadership to kind of make sure that they're setting the path for everybody else to follow. Okay. So the theory is universal, right? So we talked about in the beginning of this conversation some principles that he set forth. Principles, are universal, right? They're going to apply to basically all organizations, or let's say most organizations, and most situations. Like the preponderance, the most of the time, these principles will apply, whether it be for-profit, non-profit, etc. These things will apply in terms of the best outcome. Flexible. So flexible, actually, I was having a conversation the other day with someone around how often do you update a standard operating procedure, for example. And I remember, one of the consulting firms that I did work for, we used to have any new staff that joined the team, their role would be to update that SOP. Like the first thing we would do on day one would say, okay, take the SOP, standard operating procedure, right? Which is basically like a protocol or something where you can kind of follow step by step. A desk guide is another maybe term, but you're going to follow that thing step by step to know what you need to do to get this function to work properly. And they would follow it along, and they would figure out where the broken links are and what's not working right and different things. And then they would update it, right? They would make that update. So flexible means that you're constantly improving this process and refining it, relooking at it and making sure that it's appropriate, because things change, the environment changes, the world changes, right? And you need to be able to be very adaptable and flexible, even though we're using kind of scientific methods and thinking to get this stuff done. Cause and effect relationships. So, if we know what the cause effect relationships are, we can maybe make quicker and better adjustments. We want to try to use maybe the system and the culture to influence human behavior. We want that human behavior, because human behavior can be pretty unpredictable, right? So we want to make sure that we can get that human behavior to match what the system needs of that human behavior. So that is certainly an aim of this approach. Okay. Equal importance is just talking about, we need to prioritize work. We need to look at what's coming in, the work pipeline, if you will, and we need to prioritize. We need to make first things first, right? What should be focused on first by the staff and by the functions and by everybody else, and what are lower level priorities that we maybe need to get to later on, right? That has to be a constant thought process. Selecting based on science and then training and developing workers is really key. I remember some years, I don't know if they do it too much anymore, but I remember some years ago, a lot of firms were using a lot of these like software, adaptive software things that you'd have to like kind of go in and take a test, and they would kind of see how you scored and whether or not that would mean you had the sufficient whatever to be a part of their team. I know, I believe, I'm pretty sure the military, I think they've been doing it for the longest, right? They use a test called the ASVAB, right? I think the Army does this in order to select folks on the, I think it's only on the enlisted side, to put them into certain jobs. So somebody comes in from high school, the military gives them this test. This test says, okay, you are naturally inclined to this particular type of discipline, so we're going to put you in that discipline, right? Seems to work fairly well. At first pass, at first screen, you're kind of putting somebody into some kind of role, function, job that they're naturally inclined for. Now, of course, people, if they stay in the military for a long time, they can upskill and they can, reclassify themselves and go into a different line of work. But that initial screen, it seems to work, fairly well. So that's kind of that scientific selection process going on. And if you think about, hundreds of thousands of people or whatever coming into the military every year, needing to be filtered in, that test seems to do its job. Of course, we could always have the debate about whether or not tests are fair or not fair, and these type of things, and that's certainly, and that's part of what you would have to think about for your organization, right? Is my test providing a fair and reasonable approach that anybody who should be qualified is getting through that system? Because maybe for whatever reason, my filtering system, my algorithm is filtering out people who should be qualified, right? And so you have to be careful, obviously, when you're doing that kind of screening. So maybe that's only one data point in maybe a larger screening process, like the individual conversations and psychological evaluations or whatever you want to do in terms of your hiring process. All right. And then, of course, equal divisions of responsibility between management and workers, right? So managers have a role, workers have a role. So we want to make sure that there is, some good balance there between the two. Okay. So some of the techniques that you may have heard of, or maybe hearing it now for the first time: work study, time study, method study, motion study. So you're really looking at human factors, the person, how they're working, how they're moving. As you can see here, I'm sitting at my desk. I'm in this chair that I bought. I think I bought this chair like 13 years ago. I don't know, many years ago. And I absolutely love this chair. But anyway, it makes me feel very productive, puts me in a very comfortable space that I can read, think, write, and have a conference like this. And then my other things around me are arranged where I have my computers and my screens and my lights and things and cameras and microphones, all situated in a place where it makes kind of good sense in terms of ergonomics. So that's kind of what you're looking to do when you're setting up workspaces. And you do some of these different studies to figure that out, because that alleviates fatigue, right? If I sit in this location here, I could probably work for a good, who knows, maybe 10 hours straight, right? But if I sit at my kitchen table upstairs, right, maybe I can only work for I don't know, 5 hours, right? Because my kitchen table is not set up for me to be efficient and focus and concentrate for a long period of time. It's really set up for me to eat a meal and I should get up after that, right? So anyway, so thinking about that development of functional foremanship, right? You want to certainly have the right leadership in place, tools and equipment. And by the way, functional foremanship, you may be looking for a SME, a subject matter expert, to provide that kind of maybe technical guidance to the crew, if you will, or to the people working in that function. Standardization of tools and equipment. So you want to have standard tools. You want to if I have a pen here, and if I leave and another person comes in to teach a class, maybe they should be able to pick up exactly these tools and use them also, right? They shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, if you will, right? So things should be pretty standard and easy to transfer from maybe individual A to individual B, individual C, right? We all know how to use a shovel, right? So a shovel could be the same for each person. Um, we talked about scientific selection, costing system, right? So, this is now layering on top of what we were talking about before in terms of the sufficient scientific work approach. We're layering in now the cost piece so that the organization can also understand how efficient these workers are in terms of the cost. So the cost per widget that is being produced, for example, maybe on a factory, maybe the cost per widget is $10, right? And maybe over time, as they continue to tweak and adjust the working conditions for they raise the lights, they lower the lights, and they've done all these studies before. They raise the lights, they lower the lights, they look at working from 9 to 5 versus working from 7 to 3 versus working from different hour spans, 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, maybe 10 hours. What makes the most sense, and over time, this along with the costing system may be able to give enough feedback to determine what is the optimal way of working that will where that widget will be produced at the lowest possible cost. So that widget right now is maybe being produced at $10, but maybe after we make all of these adjustments and we set this thing in place, maybe then it's being produced at $7 per widget, right? So we're saving $3 per widget just because we've adjusted or reorganized how we're working. Okay, and then of course, mental revolution. We want to make sure that we are thinking and being able to update our thinking to adjust to new and different situations and scenarios. Okay. All right. So there's some criticism, and then I'll wrap up here. So there's some criticism of scientific management. So, productivity increases may prefer machine over man. So this is one kind of criticism. Like if you're really trying to be more and more and more productive, you're going to want to automate as much of those low-level skills as you can, right? So, so that is a problem for a lot of folks, and that's one of those concerns that. So, as we're getting more and more productive, you want to automate a lot of different, a lot of those tasks that were used to maybe are initially are done by a person. If it's cheap enough, or maybe if it's cheaper, right? I said $7 per widget, right? But maybe if you can figure out a way to get the machine to do it for $5 per widget or $4 per widget, right? Then maybe you would just use the machine and you no longer need that person. And I mean, obviously you want to be able to get that person maybe into a higher level, higher order work. I mean, we have to be, I think one should likely be thoughtful in terms of displacing large amounts of workers, because that can cause some other serious problems in terms of social issues, right? So, but the fact of the matter is, as we become more and more sophisticated in our business, as we can become more and more sophisticated in our work, some of those lower level functions, we want to get the machine to do a lot of that stuff, and we can get the humans to do what humans do best, which is to think and be creative and develop new things. So anyway, that's one of the criticisms, right? Because if you start to displacing a lot of workers, that's not necessarily a good thing. So anyway, but minimizes creative works. We talked about that a little bit just now, right? Because if you're treating the person like a cog in the wheel or like a machine, that person no longer is going to be creative, right? That person is going to be very much doing rote things. Harm to your health, because if harm to people's health because they're maybe working too hard, and they're doing too much of the same thing over and over. Maybe that's going to be a problem for their health. I remember when the computer first came out, before they were now ergonomically efficient, people were getting like carpal tunnel syndrome because of the way they were sitting and typing all day. And I think that's somewhat gone away. I haven't seen too much of that anymore. But anyway, that's something that was happening many years ago, because people were sitting and kind of typing in a way that was not necessarily the best way. Jobs become dull, right? People get bored, right? And then, of course, the need for unionization maybe starts to diminish, and that could also be a bit of an issue, right? So something to consider in terms of some of the criticisms. And that's from the labor standpoint. From the management standpoint, it's very expensive to develop, implement, and maintain a system like this. So, like, say, for example, if you want to do this in your own business, say you have a business of 100 employees and you want to do this, you likely are already busy in your day job, you and your employees, and you guys don't necessarily have the bandwidth to try to figure this thing out on your own. So what are you going to do? You're going to hire a consultant like myself, right? And the consultant's going to come in and they're going to set this whole thing up for you. Consultants are not cheap, but they will probably do it very, hopefully they do a good job for you on the first pass, and they set you all up. And then after that, they will be able to step away and maybe let you work it on your own. Or more likely that, from my experience, once again, because these companies and organizations have day jobs to do, they likely will retain some element of the consultants to keep this thing working properly, right? So that's just maybe the trade-off. So it's expensive to develop and implement maintain these systems, and it's risky. So you don't know if it's really going to work out. And if there's a cultural change that's needed to make this thing work, that's obviously going to take maybe a long time to get that done. So, and it can be very time consuming, right? So now not only are you doing your day job, running your shop, running your organization, but now you have to constantly deal with, maybe these consultants and other people trying to get you to look at how to retool, change, reorganize, right? So it may be best for a lot of big organizations that have a lot of economies of scale, or small organizations who may have a person organic to the organization, or maybe a part-time consultant who can come in and help them out, may be helpful. So it won't be as time consuming or as expensive. But it, of course, deteriorates over time. So over time, it starts to wear out, and then you got to kind of reorganize, rejigger it. So, all right. So that's all. I'll leave you here with a few quotes. Here's a quote: "Money is not capital in most developing countries. It's just cash, because it lacks the institutional, organizational, and managerial forms to turn it into capital." Now, notwithstanding, the developing countries, I think the point of this quote is really about, in order to have capital, you need structure, right? You need organizational structure around that capital. Organizational theory is very important for that reason, right? It helps to structure your capital. So if you're putting your capital into something, right? Like I said earlier, one of the courses I teach is corporate finance, and we talk a lot about, obviously capital deployment in that class. But organizational theory plays a very big role in figuring out how to structure that capital within the organization in a way to make it productive and make that capital return higher returns. This quote is a little bit problematic, obviously, because I would just say maybe if it's a developing country and they don't have maybe all of the institutions that maybe a more developed country has, maybe the capital, you can just consider the capital to be a bit more risky, right? So your risk premium to deploy capital into that part of the world, maybe you require a higher expected return or a higher risk premium. So I wouldn't necessarily phrase it the way it's phrased here, but I think it does make a fairly interesting point about the importance of organizational, managerial, and institutional forms in order to support capital. No body of knowledge. And this is interesting because this body of knowledge is like, of like in a domain, there is a body of knowledge around a specific topic or domain or subject, right? So think of maybe physics. In physics, there's a body of knowledge around the domain of physics, right? But body of knowledge, the way this is written is also like no body of knowledge, I mean like a person who has knowledge. So I like the dual kind of meaning there. I don't know, I find it interesting because I'm a bit weird like that. But anyway, no body of knowledge needs an organizational policy. The organizational policy can only impede advancements of knowledge, right? There is a basic compatibility between any organization and freedom of thought, which is a very interesting point, right? Because an organization, by definition, is going to have constraints. There's going to be constraints on an organization. If you're working for or within an organization, you can only do certain things. So, and so if you're a free thinker, right, maybe you don't have the ability to have that free thought because you are within that organization. So yeah, it's an interesting quote. And then the last one here is major organizational changes creates uncertainty, but the point is to move quickly. The faster you're comfortable, faster than you're comfortable, because in hindsight, you will always wish you made the changes even sooner. I was actually talking to somebody recently about this very fact. I had the opportunity to run a 250 person organization for a while, and I will admit one of the things that I did not do fast enough was make some big changes quickly. So certainly can attest that, you guys gotta, organizations are dynamic. They're living, breathing things, and they should change consistently, right? Not just all over the place and kind of willy-nilly, but, a deliberate, methodical, consistent change to make sure that an organization is always well situated in the marketplace to execute its mission, right? So even if it's a nonprofit or a for-profit or a governmental organization, doesn't really matter. All organizations have to constantly undergo some level of change to stay relevant, to stay current, and to be situated in a way where they can execute their mission to the highest potential. All right, so that's all I have for today. I will share some more stuff tomorrow. So thank you for stopping by, and see you soon.